to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews.
Today we continue with 1 Chronicles chapter 26. As for the divisions of the gatekeepers, of the Korahites, Meshelemiah the son of Kor, of the sons of Asaph. And Meshelemiah had sons, Zechariah the firstborn, Jediael the second, Zebediah the third, Jathniel the fourth, Elam the fifth, Jehohanan the sixth, Elihonai the seventh, and Obed-Edom had sons, Shemaiah the firstborn, Jehozabad the second, Joah the third, Sakar the fourth, Nethanel the fifth, Amael the sixth, Issachar the seventh, Pulathai the eighth, for God blessed him. Also to his son Shemaiah were sons born who were rulers in their fathers' houses, for they were men of great ability. The sons of Shemaiah, Othni, Rephael, Obed, and Elzabad, whose brothers were all able men. Elihu and Semachiah, all these were the sons of Obed-Edom with their sons and brothers, able men qualified for the service. 62 of Obed-Edom. And Meshelemiah had sons and brothers, able men, 18. And Hosa of the sons of Merari had sons, Shimri the chief, for though he was not the firstborn, his father made him chief. Hilkiah the second, Tebaliah the third, Zechariah the fourth, all the sons and brothers of Hosa were 13. These divisions of the gatekeepers, corresponding to their chief men, had duties, just as their brothers did, ministering in the house of Yahweh. And they cast lots by fathers' houses, small and great alike, for their gates. The lot for the east fell to Shelemiah. They cast lots also for his son Zechariah, a shrewd counselor, and his lot came out for the north. Obed-Edom's came out for the south, and his sons was allotted the gatehouse. For Shuppim and Hosa it came out for the west, at the gate of Shalaketh, on the road that goes up. Watch corresponded to watch. On the east there were 6 each day, on the north 4 each day, on the south 4 each day, as well as 2 and 2 at the gatehouse. And for the colonnade on the west there were 4 at the road and 2 at the colonnade. These were the divisions of the gatekeepers among the Korahites and the sons of Merari. And of the Levites Ahijah had charge of the treasuries of the house of God and the treasuries of the dedicated gifts. The sons of Ladan, the sons of the Gershonites belonging to Ladan, the heads of the fathers' houses belonging to Ladan the Gershonite, Jehieli. The sons of Jehieli, Zetham, and Joel his brother were in charge of the treasuries of the house of Yahweh. Of the Amramites, the Izharites, the Hebronites, and the Uzzielites. And Shebuel, the son of Gershom, son of Moses, was chief officer in charge of the treasuries. His brothers from Eleazar were his son Rehabiah, and his son Jeshaiah, and his son Joram, and his son Zichri, and his son Shelomoth. This Shelomoth and his brothers were in charge of all the treasuries of the dedicated gifts that David the king, and the heads of the fathers' houses, and the officers of the thousands and the hundreds, and the commanders of the army had dedicated. From spoil won in battles they dedicated gifts for the maintenance of the house of Yahweh. Also, all that Samuel the seer and Saul the son of Kish and Abner the son of Ner and Joab the son of Zeruiah had dedicated, all dedicated gifts were in the care of Shelomoth and his brothers. Of the Izharites, Kenaniah and his sons were appointed to the external duties for Israel as officers and judges. Of the Hebronites, Hashabiah and his brothers, 1,700 men of ability, had the oversight of Israel westward of the Jordan for all the work of Yahweh and for the service of the king. Of the Hebronites, Jerijah was the chief of the Hebronites of whatever genealogy or fathers' houses. In the 40th year of David's reign, search was made, and men of great ability among them were found at Jazer and Gilead. King David appointed him and his brothers, 2,700 men of ability, heads of fathers' houses, to have the oversight of the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of the Manassites, for everything pertaining to God and for the affairs of the king. This is the word of the Lord. This is something I failed to mention the last couple of days in our study of the text. Really, chapter 23 through 29 are part of that distinctiveness of 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles compared to the books of Samuel and Kings. Mentioned at the start of our study of this book, there's a lot of overlap, a lot of parallel between them, as one is written, I guess Samuel and Kings both together, written prior to the exile, while this book is written a few generations after the exile in Babylon. And at that, even a few generations after the exile in Babylon has ended. So these are unique to this book, and the focus, again, is on the worship life of God's people. Today we get the gatekeepers, and we get those who manage the treasuries and those who serve as officers and judges over the people. This is something I also didn't mention yesterday as we were looking at the text. There were 288 musicians. David said back in chapter 23 that there would be 4,000 who would offer praise to the Yahweh with instruments. Here, gatekeepers, hard to say what the actual number is. The Study Bible, Lutheran Study Bible, likes the number 93 here because you get 62, 18, and 13 mentioned in verses 8 through 11. But if you add in the family of Meshelemiah in the first couple of verses, you could get the 7 sons would bring that 93 up to 100, or 101 if we count Meshelemiah. And yet 4,000 gatekeepers was mentioned in chapter 23, verse 5. Then we're going to get the officers and the judges, and we're going to have the number of 4,400 as we add together 1,700, 2,700 in this text today. But David said it should be 6,000 back in chapter 23, verse 4. So David has taken all of the Levites, and he's organized them into these groups, and it appears, I think I can say this in fairness, it appears he then from those groups even is more selective in choosing those who will do the work. It's possible that the other men were somehow involved, but this is what we have from the Lord. This is the text that we've received, and it's hard to really say much more than that. So they could be involved still, or this could be selective in servitude, like specific, special roles set aside and only certain men serving those roles. So today we start with the gatekeepers, and it might be worth asking your children, what do you think the gatekeepers did? What was their job? And if your kids are snarky at all, they might just say they kept the gates, which is about as close as the Bible actually ever gets to telling us. There's never a list of duties that gatekeepers did. It's just not there. Gatekeepers show up a few times, and in those spots where they show up, on occasion we pick up a hint of something. So 2 Chronicles chapter 23, verse 19 does say that they were to keep out the unclean. So the unclean could not enter the temple, because wherever the unclean go, whatever they enter, whatever they touch becomes unclean as well, and that would pollute the people around them. It would be bad for their neighbors, to make their neighbors unclean. To come into the temple would be to profane the things of God. Those are holy, set apart, and not to be profaned. So that's one job of the gatekeeper. So almost a bouncer, as we would think of a club or something today. Then Nehemiah chapter 12, verse 25, we learn that they also guarded the storehouses that were by the gates. So the various rooms that they would have had within the temple complex for storing the things needed for sacrifices or offerings to the Lord and so forth. They had that responsibility of making sure that those were not stolen, plundered. So the idea of protecting the Lord's house, aiding those who were coming to worship the Lord, and perhaps giving direction. So you might think today of, in your congregation, the ushers or the elders or the greeters who, well, they keep the gate. They're at the door. They welcome people in. If somebody has no idea, they're new visiting, and they just step in, giving them the assistance that they need to know where to go, how to worship with the congregation that day. Those sorts of things might be a today parallel with the idea of the gatekeepers. I like to bring up here Psalm 84, verse 10. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. That becomes a part of our liturgy in some of our Lutheran congregations as well, and just a beautiful reminder that to be in the Lord's house, to be in the presence of God, whatever your role is far better than the life we have in this world right now. Paradise awaits us, brothers and sisters in Christ, and it's going to be glorious. glorious, as we will be with Jesus. We will be feasting at his table forevermore, the source of all things good, God himself, for us, with us, in us. So their duties are assigned. Lots are cast for them to guard the various gates. You've got a gate on each side, as you think of your 4 cardinal directions. So Shelemiah gets the east side. His son Zechariah gets the north side. Obed-Edom, who is the one who got the Ark of the Covenant to remain in his home for a few months when David was afraid to bring it the rest of the way to Jerusalem, he gets the south side, and his sons get the gatehouse. That word shows up, gatehouse, twice right here in this text. Nowhere else in the Bible. So we're left a little bit in the blue on what that phrase means, and historically, when we think of a gatehouse, it's a defensible, fortified position for keeping the gates, defending something. So could be in line with that, the idea that there is the south gate, extra fortification on this south gate to protect the temple, and that these sons of Obed-Edom are in charge of that particular structure. Then Shupim and Hosa get the western gate. So they divide up watches, they break it up into shifts, sessions, and primarily the number is going to be 4. However, there are 6 watches on the east instead of 4, and the gatehouse will have 2 and 2, which still adds up to 4. Verse 18 mentions the colonnade on the west. A colonnade is like a covered porch area, so an open floor, but with pillars that lead up to some kind of a roof or awning that oversees it, shadows it, gives it shade. That colonnade, by the way, may well be then Solomon's colonnade that gets mentioned in the New Testament in John chapter 10, verse 23. Jesus was walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. When the temple is destroyed by the Babylonians, just torn down in 587 BC, John 10 suggests that that very small piece of the temple complex is still standing. And so when Zerubbabel then would have rebuilt his temple, or built the second temple, might be the better way to phrase that, perhaps built around that existing remaining structure and did not remove it. So this might be that same location. Then we get into the treasurers and other officials. This is a good opportunity, I think, to talk about the offerings that are collected at your church. Ask your kids, the money that gets put in the plate when that plate goes by, what's that used for? It's an important conversation to know where the money goes. It doesn't just disappear, or at least it really shouldn't. That's not good if it's doing that. If you don't know what's happening with the money, you can certainly ask. The church will likely have a treasurer, a financial secretary, various people that assist in the care of counting and taking care of and expending those funds for various purposes. The upkeep of your church, the building itself, is going to be one of the roles, and that's seen here. And this is going to be for the upkeep of the house of Yahweh, very specifically said there in verse 27. The spoils of war were used for the maintenance of the house. It's going to be used for the care of your pastor and his family, so providing him with an income, since he spends his time not working in the field as a farmer or not going off and having a career where he works in an office or as a construction man, various tasks. But instead he seeks to preach Christ to you, and that's his job, is to study the Scriptures and feed you the Scriptures, to give you word and sacrament. And so the church pays for that. The church encourages it. The church wants to make sure that they always have word and sacrament available in their community for their families. And that's what the pastor's for. So that's part of it. Mission work, giving money to those who are in need. That's a big part of the Old Testament picture of the tithe. when you get to the picture in Malachi, the book of Malachi as a whole really talks about this. But you see it elsewhere too, that the tithe is to support the widows and the orphans, those who cannot care for themselves. So some of the temple treasury might have that in mind, even here in the Old Testament picture also. So there's these various things that are done with the funds of the church, and some of them direct parallel between Old and New Testament life of God's people. So we have Ahijah, and then in the second paragraph, we really end up seeing Moses' family brought into this picture as well, as being some of those who oversee the money contributed to the well-being of God's house and his people. And again, spoils of war mentioned not just from David, but also from before David, from Samuel the seer or prophet, and then Saul, Israel's first king, as well as a few other men mentioned there. So this is going to be a reference back to the events in 1 Samuel, the book. Then, last paragraph, the external duties of Israel. You had men appointed to serve in these roles. That's so outside the temple, in other words, not related to the worship life of God's people or the upkeep of the house of God, but rather other things that were still important duties that the Levites were performing. These are officers and judges. Much like, as I mentioned before, as we talked about this in chapter 23, Moses in Exodus chapter 18 was judging between the people. When there were conflicts among the people and they could not figure it out how to handle it themselves, they would bring the conflict to Moses, and he would, as God's servant, give a right decree on the situation, a judge between man and man. And so, at his father-in-law's suggestion, he incorporated other men into that task, so it wasn't just a burden on himself, but he only then oversaw the hard cases. The cases would be brought to these other men first, and if they could not figure out the case, they would bring it to Moses, and he would inquire of Yahweh. This is the kind of pattern then we see set up with the temple under King David as well, that David is going to appoint these men, 1,700 to serve on the west side of the Jordan and 2,700 to serve on the east side of the Jordan, which is really interesting because there's probably more people. I could be wrong on this, but I'm assuming with the most of the tribes being on the west of the Jordan that there were more people on that side of the Jordan. But perhaps it's because the east side of the Jordan, territorially speaking, may be more spread out, and so you need more officers, more judges, like small town life, versus being packed into a city. That could be part of the situation here. We're not really told, but just something to consider. In verse 31, the parenthetical note that the 40th year of David, he made search for great men, men of great ability, and found them in Gilead east of the Jordan. That 40th year is the last year. David reigns for 40 years over Israel before his death. So most of this section happening in David's, really the tail end of David's time as king, as he's gathering together resources and appointing men to serve, all in the temple that he's preparing his son Solomon to build for Yahweh.